Sometimes, on Everest, a person is declared dead and left behind on the mountain. As a rule, there's no coming back from that. And yet, over the past 30 years, the almost impossible has happened here more than once. People who'd already been written off were later found alive. Some made it down on their own, others were helped by strangers. In this video, 3 of those stories, and one simple question. At that altitude, is the death sentence always final? Early June of 2026, at the foot of Everest. A crew clearing the glacier of trash from the season that just ended notices something moving on the snow. It's a person. He isn't walking, and he isn't even crawling in the usual sense. Slowly, in jerks, he's dragging himself down across the ice. When they get closer, the incredible truth comes out. In front of them is a man who's been counted as dead for 6 days. His name is Dawa Sherpa, and he's 52 years old. 6 days earlier, he fell behind his group while descending from the summit and vanished. A full rescue operation was never even launched. The season had closed, people were heading home, and the route up the mountain was already being taken apart. Down in the valley, his family, hearing nothing, began the funeral rites. As far as they were concerned, he was never coming back. But he does come back. For 6 full days, he's utterly alone on the highest mountain on Earth. No oxygen bottle, no food, no water. Nobody brings him down, nobody finds him, nobody leads him by the hand. He descends on his own and reaches the spot where he's finally spotted alive. The story feels like a one-off, almost impossible. In fact, it isn't the first. Everest has a cruel way of deceiving people. A man is pronounced dead, left on the slope, mourned, and then he turns out to be alive. It happens rarely, but it happens. Over the past 30 years, only a handful of people on this mountain were written off and still came back. You can count them on one hand, and every single case is hard to wrap your head around. 3 of them, condemned far too early, are what the rest of this is about. To understand how a living person gets crossed off the list of the living, you have to climb up to where it happens. Everything above 8,000 meters, climbers call the death zone. The name isn't for dramatic effect. There's so little oxygen in the air up there that the body doesn't recover. It slowly fails. Without an oxygen bottle, a person lasts on average 16 to 20 hours, and after that, the countdown begins. In this zone, people get written off in 2 ways, and both are unreliable. The first, they're simply left behind, before anyone has truly made sure they can't get out on their own. There's no strength left to rescue them, the group heads down, the oxygen runs out, and the exhausted climber is abandoned right where he sat down. The second way is more insidious. A person is taken for dead while he's unconscious, and this is where the great deception hides. Severe hypothermia slows the pulse and breathing almost to nothing. The body is cold, motionless, with no apparent signs of life, and yet the person is still alive. Rescuers even have a rule. You can't call someone dead until the body has been warmed and stays lifeless even once it's warm. At that altitude, there's almost nothing to check it with, and no time. Add to that the simple, brutal logistics. Lifting and lowering a motionless person above 8,000 meters is a nearly impossible task, no matter how many people take it on. So, the decision to leave someone behind is sometimes made not out of indifference, but out of helplessness. And still, the verdict of dead, handed down at that altitude, in rare cases turns out to be a mistake. The most recent example of such a mistake takes place in 2026. The man we left dragging himself across the glacier is named Dawa Sherpa, though foreigners just call him Hillary. He comes from the Okhaldhunga district, south of Everest. A family waits for him at home, and it's for them that he returns to the mountain year after year. The work of a high-altitude Sherpa feeds the whole household. This season, Dawa goes up Everest in a role that explains a great deal. He's hired not as a climber and not as a guide, but as a cook. His place is Camp 2, at around 6,400 meters, where he prepares meals for clients between their pushes up the mountain. The work is hard, but relatively safe. A cook has no need to go to the summit, and yet, he goes. The team is short on people, and the company decides to use Dawa as an ordinary high-altitude guide on the summit push. A man hired to cook is sent into the death zone to lead clients. Later, experienced climbers will say it plainly. A Camp 2 cook has no business on the upper slopes. He wasn't trained for that kind of work. Worse still, Dawa is responsible for more than just himself. Two clients are placed in his care, and neither of them is anywhere near experienced. So, a man assigned this season to be a camp cook ends up leading two beginners across the single most dangerous stretch on the planet. With a team like that, they set out for the summit at around 11 at night. From the very start, everything goes too slowly. A climb that usually takes 10 to 12 hours stretches to almost 18. Those who do reach the summit are standing on it around 5 in the evening, which, by Everest standards, is unacceptably late. Ahead lie the night, the cold, and a long descent. And there's barely any strength or oxygen left. Every extra hour at that altitude takes away what you can't get back: warmth, strength, and the ability to think clearly. Dawa himself and his Polish client don't reach the summit and turn back earlier. But even the descent is brutal. The weather worsens, visibility drops, and the way down drags on endlessly. Somewhere on the section they call the yellow band, an exhausted Dawa sits down to rest and tells his client to go on ahead without waiting. This is normal in the mountains. The stronger one descends first, and the Sherpa catches up later. Only this time, Dawa won't be catching up. This is where he's seen for the last time. It's the 29th of May. He has a radio and a satellite phone on him, the kind of connection that, you'd think, wouldn't let a person simply disappear. But there's almost no one left around him. The season is ending, and in these very hours the other members are coming down off the mountain and heading home. The slope, packed with lines of climbers not long ago, is emptying fast. And in that emptiness, an exhausted man with a radio in his pocket is left completely alone, higher than any help can reach. Dawa still tries to descend on his own, and almost immediately loses his footing. Below Camp 1, he falls into a glacial crevasse, a deep crack in the ice at around 5,500 meters. He can't climb out right away. In that icy slit, Dawa spends nearly 2 full days. He has no food, apart from a stray pack of cookies in his pocket. Instead of water, he eats snow and ice. What saves him, strangely enough, is the mountain itself. Snow slides down into the crevasse from above and partly fills the gap, creating something like a foothold. Using it, the exhausted man climbs back out. Ahead of him lies the most treacherous part of the route, the Khumbu Icefall, a maze of shifting ice and crevasses. Normally it's crossed using fixed ladders, but the ladders are already gone. The season is closed. Dawa goes through the icefall alone, without protection, feeling his way. On the 3rd of June, a search helicopter passes overhead. Dawa raises his arms, but from the air no one notices him. He's too small a dot on the enormous glacier. It seems the last chance is gone. And yet the next morning, the 4th of June, the very thing happens that this whole story began with. On the glacier, he's finally seen alive. A helicopter carries Dawa to Kathmandu. At the hospital, they record frostbite on his fingers and a fracture of the thigh bone near the knee, the result of 6 days without help. But he's alive, conscious, and, against all odds, recovering faster than the doctors expect. Dawa survives on his own, but his return leaves behind a heavy question. Why did no one ever come for him? When he didn't make it down to camp, his company didn't send anyone out to search. Technically, Dawa himself sent his client ahead, but he's a Sherpa, an employee his employer is responsible for. There was almost no time left to fix the mistake. The route through the icefall was already being dismantled, and climbing up it on foot to search was impossible. Only helicopters remained. The single flyover is arranged not by his company, but by an outside firm, and only at the insistent request of his relatives. That flight turns out to be in vain. From the air, Dawa isn't found. When it comes out that for almost a week no one really looked for him, the story spreads beyond a single mountain. Nepal's Department of Tourism opens an official investigation and warns, if negligence is confirmed, the company will be blacklisted and stripped of its right to operate. The Nepal Mountaineering Association demands an independent inquiry. Dawa's family has no intention of staying silent. They push for justice and file an official complaint. Behind all of this stands one uncomfortable question. On the most visited mountain on the planet, a man can fall, freeze, and stay without help for almost a week, and no one even notices in time. Dawa's story isn't the only one. Everest has returned the buried before, and in that sense the case of 2026 is more a repeat than an exception. 20 years before Dawa, almost the very same thing happens to an Australian named Lincoln Hall. Hall is no accidental tourist. He's a veteran of the first Australian expedition to Everest, all the way back in 1984. True, he didn't reach the summit then. Illness struck him down on the approach, and it was his teammates who made it to the top, not him. That unrealized summit doesn't let go of him for more than 20 years. And so, in May of 2006, 22 years later, the 50-year-old Hall finally stands on the summit of Everest, having climbed from the Tibetan side. The dream of a lifetime comes true, and then begins the very thing that made us remember him in the first place. On the descent, at around 8,700 meters, Hall develops cerebral edema. He stops coping with the lack of oxygen. His mind clouds over. He no longer understands where he is or what he's doing. For several hours, the Sherpas try to bring him down. They drag him, plead with him, wait. But night falls, the oxygen runs out, and everyone is nearly out of strength. Hall barely reacts and seems dead, while the rescuers themselves are barely holding on. And then, over the radio, the expedition leader makes a hard decision to save the living. He orders the Sherpas to go down and leave Hall on the slope. Had they stayed with him to the end, he wouldn't have been the only one to die in the death zone. A short message goes out to Australia. Lincoln Hall has died on the descent from Everest. While his family in Australia mourns Hall, on that same mountain, a new day begins. Up toward the spot where he was left, climbs another team, 4 people who are pushing for the summit that morning. They know that somewhere here lies the Australian who died the day before, and they're prepared to see a body. Instead of a body, they see a man sitting up. Hall is alive. He has no hat, no gloves, his clothing unfastened, no oxygen mask. His gear was stripped off the day before when he was taken for dead. He says something, gets confused, but he's conscious. For the 4 climbers, it's a shock. In front of them is a man the whole world already believes is dead. And here they face the choice that, in essence, makes this story worth telling. The summit, the one they'd worked toward for years and paid for, is now within reach. They could walk past. Technically, Hall has already been written off, and no one would have blamed them, but they stay. The American Dan Mazur and his companions turn around without reaching their goal. They give Hall their oxygen, their food, and their warm clothes. They warm him up and don't leave his side while they call for help over the radio. Sherpas climb up to them from below. The ascent that had been the whole point of their expedition ends right there. The 4 of them trade their own summit for someone else's life. Thanks to those 4, Hall has a chance. He's gradually lowered, and at the high camp on the saddle, the expedition doctor takes care of him. The descent is hard, but Hall holds on and reaches the foot of the mountain alive. A night in the death zone doesn't pass without consequences, though. Because of frostbite, Hall loses several fingers on his hands and a toe on his foot. And still, by the measure of what happened to him, that's an astonishingly small price. A man who was declared dead over the radio and abandoned on the slope walks off Everest almost intact. Hall will later tell his story himself. He'll write a book about the event. A television film will be made about his return, and the rescue of Lincoln Hall will join the list of Everest's most famous stories, right beside the ones where help never came. After the mountains, Hall lives on for several more years. He keeps writing, speaking, remembering that night he had no business surviving. And he passes away only in 2012, and not because of Everest, but because of an illness with no connection to the mountains at all. But the most famous return from beyond the grave happened even earlier, in 1996, during a tragedy that books would be written about and films would be made about. One of its central figures is the American Beck Weathers, a doctor from Dallas, and a client on a commercial expedition. Weathers has a particular problem from the very start. Not long before the climb, he'd had eye surgery, and at high altitude, where the pressure drops, his vision begins to fail him. He nearly goes blind. The expedition leader tells him to stay put and wait while the others go to the summit and return. Weathers obediently waits. Only the leader himself will never come down from that summit. He'll stay on the mountain forever. And then the storm comes. One of the most savage blizzards in Everest's history descends on the mountain, and the group, exhausted and blinded in the snowy gloom, loses its way not far from the South Pole. The people don't know where they are and simply try not to freeze, huddled together on the open slope. By morning, the rescuers are forced to make a hard choice, to take the ones who still have a chance. By that point, Weathers looks hopeless. He lies in the snow, doesn't move, doesn't respond. A rescuer comes over, examines him, and reaches the same conclusion that was once spoken over Hall. This man won't make it, and no strength can be spared on him. Weathers is left on the slope, and here happens something that fits no logic at all. Abandoned in cold of around 40 degrees below, he lies motionless for almost an entire day. No tent, no fire, no help from anyone. By every medical measure, a person in that state doesn't survive. The body should have given up long ago. And then Weathers opens his eyes. He comes back from the deepest hypothermia, as if out of a coma. Consciousness returns slowly, but it returns. Weathers understands one thing. If he doesn't get up right now, he'll stay here forever. And he gets up. Half blind, with frostbitten hands and face, he stumbles across the snow toward camp, on his own. Without a rope, without a guide, navigating almost by touch. And he makes it. When Weathers appears at the tents of the high camp, to the others it's like meeting a ghost. In front of them stands a man they had crossed off the list of the living twice the day before. In camp, they finally warm him and bring him around, as much as that's possible at such altitude. He no longer has the strength to descend on his own 2 feet, and a few days later, a helicopter comes for him. Along with Weathers, another survivor is evacuated, the Taiwanese climber Makalu Gao. At the time, it's one of the highest altitude helicopter evacuations in history. The aircraft is set down, where by the calculations, it can barely stay in the air. Weathers survives, but the return costs him dearly. What the cold and the hours in the death zone did can't be undone. Because of severe frostbite, he loses his right hand and the fingers of his left, along with part of both feet. His face was badly damaged too. To rebuild his nose, the doctors have to turn to plastic surgery. A long series of procedures follows, more than a dozen operations in all, spread out over months. You'd think a man would break after something like that. But Weathers chooses otherwise. He returns to his profession as a doctor, learns all over again to live with a new body, and writes a book about what he went through. Its title says it all, Left for Dead. He doesn't hide his story, he tells it openly. But for Weathers himself, that isn't the main thing. Not long before the climb, his family life had begun to fall apart, and it was there, on the slope, between sleep and waking, that he understood who he wanted to come back for. After Everest, he rebuilds his relationships with the people closest to him, and he'll say more than once afterward that he survived that night not through strength or luck, but because he had someone to return to. These 3 are separated by nearly 30 years, by different slopes, and by completely different circumstances. And yet their stories fold into one. Each of them was written off on Everest, and each of them, in spite of that, came back. Look closely, and they were written off in different ways. 2 of them, Hall and Weathers, were taken for dead while they lay unconscious. Dawa wasn't mistaken for anyone. He was simply left alive and not searched for. Different causes, different years, and the same mistake in the end. In all 3 cases, the verdict of dead turned out to be premature. It's important to understand something else too. It wasn't willpower alone that brought these people back, the way people like to say. In one case, it was the cold itself that slowed the body and seemed to put it on pause. In another, the decisive factor was someone else's hands, the people who refused to walk past. And in another, it all came down to chance. A crew that noticed movement on the glacier, or a team that set out for the top on that exact morning. Will help them get up, but on its own, it doesn't save anyone. And one question remains, the one the mountain has no final answer to. We're used to thinking that dead is the end, the full stop beyond which nothing more happens. But at altitude, where the cold deceives the senses and help doesn't always come, that verdict turns out to be far less final than it seems. Sometimes the one who was crossed off the list of the living still makes it down, on his own.